You step into this with the quiet confidence of someone who believes their intentions are clean. You've spent years telling yourself you're a nice person. You hold doors open. You listen politely. You help people move houses. You lend emotional support like it's a full-time job. You've convinced yourself that niceness is your currency, and the world should eventually return the favor. But beneath that polite exterior, there's an emotional economy constantly running. A subtle calculation of who owes you, who appreciates you, and who doesn't even notice. You keep pretending your motives are pure because it makes life feel simpler, cleaner, more symmetrical. But the truth is that most of your niceness isn't altruism. It's transaction dressed as virtue. You help because you want to be seen as helpful. You give because you want to be valued. You tolerate because you want to avoid conflict and rejection. If morality were a vending machine, you'd be inserting good deeds hoping for validation to drop into the tray. And deep down, you know this. You want to be liked. You want to be chosen. You want others to treat you with the same level of care you extend outward. You want reciprocity, the silent contract no one signed, but you still expect everyone to honor. This is where the illusion begins to crack, because you're not reacting to people as they are. You're reacting to the roles you assigned them. The friend who should have been grateful. The partner who should have understood. The co-worker who should have respected your extra effort. You expect moral symmetry simply because you tried to play the good person. But life isn't symmetrical. People don't repay favors at the same emotional interest rate you charge. Every time someone fails to meet your invisible expectations, resentment grows. Quietly at first, like a subtle inflation in the value of your kindness. The more you give, the less it's worth. Because when kindness is abundant and unboundaried, it stops being generosity and becomes self-erasure. You know this pattern. You take someone with a limited emotional bandwidth and hand them tasks that require emotional endurance. You assign them the job title of confidant, support system, moral equal, or partner in loyalty, even though their internal skill set is closer to tries their best but cracks under pressure. It's no different from putting a part-time cashier in charge of running an entire store overnight, and then acting shocked when the place falls apart. They didn't betray the store. The manager assigned the wrong role. This is where the gratitude paradox shows up. You give them trust and expect appreciation. But appreciation doesn't come from generosity. It comes from alignment. When you give someone something they don't have the internal infrastructure to handle, they don't feel grateful. They feel burdened. And burdened people retreat, avoid, or drop the weight entirely. You see this as betrayal, but really it's gravity. This is the cognitive distortion, mistaking someone's warmth for their reliability. Mistaking someone's affection for their competence, mistaking someone's potential for their readiness. You think you're being betrayed, but really, you're just bumping into their limits. And underneath it all is a quieter truth you rarely admit. Trusting them made you feel valuable. You wanted to believe your trust could shape them into someone better, that your emotional investment could turn potential into stability. But trust doesn't transform people. It exposes them. And sometimes the exposure hurts because it contradicts the story you told yourself about who they were. Betrayal isn't always a knife in the back. Sometimes it's just someone dropping the responsibility you never should have handed them. You keep assuming that people are interchangeable as long as they care about you. As if care automatically translates into competence. As if affection automatically turns someone into a safe emotional container. But life doesn't work that way. People are not blank templates ready to be filled with your expectations. They're more like tools with specific purposes. Some are good for heavy lifting, some for fine detail, and some will snap the moment you put too much pressure on them. And yet, you keep assigning everyone in your life the same job. Hold what matters to me. It's no wonder things keep breaking. You treat trust like it's a universal plug, assuming it fits into anyone. But trust isn't a device, it's a placement. And when you put the wrong person in the wrong role, the result isn't betrayal, it's malfunction. You expect a vending machine to dispense therapy. You expect a gym acquaintance to handle emotional weight like a lifelong mentor. You expect a casual friend to show up with the reliability of a firefighter. And you expect someone who has never demonstrated stability to suddenly become the anchor holding your life steady. When this doesn't happen, you feel wronged. But feeling wronged doesn't make it betrayal. It just means the assignment was unrealistic. This is how boundary collapse begins. Not because someone intentionally invades your space, but because you grant access without checking capacity. You keep thinking, if I show them everything, the vulnerable parts, the fears, the chaos, they'll understand me better. But understanding doesn't guarantee protection. Sometimes it only gives someone a map of the places where things can go wrong. And if they're not trained to navigate it, they'll get lost, panicked, overwhelmed, or careless. Then you mistake their confusion for disloyalty. The truth is simpler. They were never built for the level of access you gave them. And here's where the reciprocity breakdown takes root. You assume that giving more automatically encourages others to give more too. You think your consistency will inspire their consistency. But reciprocity doesn't respond to effort. It responds to capacity. In economics, you cannot force a market to match your investment. If you keep pouring money into a failing asset, the market doesn't adjust to your optimism. You just lose more. Relationships follow similar logic. When you give beyond someone's capability to return, you create imbalance, not loyalty. But the deepest mistake is that you confuse compatibility with proximity. You assume people who stand close to you, emotionally or physically, are qualified to stay close. But closeness is not a job qualification. It's just a location. And locations can be misleading. Ask yourself, how many times have you handed someone the emotional equivalent of a manager's keys just because they were standing nearby? How many times have you allowed someone into an inner space you hadn't even evaluated? And how many times have you taken their inability to manage that space as a personal attack? This is the psychology of misplacement. You don't just trust people. You recruit them into roles. You assign them responsibilities that they may not even recognize. You create invisible contracts. I'll be good to you, so you should be good to me. I'll give you loyalty, so you should give me consistency. I'll offer you my vulnerabilities, so you should protect them. But invisible contracts are still contracts, and when the other person hasn't signed them, verbally, emotionally, or psychologically, you're not experiencing betrayal. You're experiencing a breach of an agreement that only existed in your mind. It's painful, but it's not personal. And here's the twist. Most people don't even realize they're being placed into these roles. They think the connection is casual, while you think it's a structured partnership. They think the relationship is flexible, while you think it's defined. They think they're holding a friendship, while you think you handed them trust, with a capital T. So when they fail, they're not failing a duty. They're failing an assumption. Not theirs. Yours. You keep thinking loyalty is a virtue everyone understands. You assume that if you operate with integrity, others will recognize it, like some universal moral currency. But loyalty isn't a shared language. It's a personal dialect. And the problem is that you speak it fluently, while others barely know the alphabet. That's why you keep getting blindsided. You're projecting your internal structure onto people who don't have the same emotional architecture. You assume they value what you value. But values aren't contagious. They don't transfer through osmosis, affection, or shared history. This is where invisible contracts start tightening around your relationships. You give someone trust, attention, loyalty, emotional labor. And in return, you expect them to treat these things with the same seriousness you do. You never say it out loud. You just assume it. Because to you, that's how fairness works. That's how good relationships operate. That's how decent people behave. But fairness is not a universal standard. It's a personal expectation disguised as a moral truth. And expectations you never articulate become silent debts you assume others will repay. This is the gratitude paradox in action. The more you give, the more you expect appreciation. But appreciation only emerges when someone recognizes the weight of what you've offered. If they don't feel the weight, because they lack the emotional maturity, the self-awareness, or the life experience, then your generosity doesn't look like generosity to them. It just looks like the default setting of your personality, something you always do, something they assume will never change, something they stop noticing. And once someone stops noticing what you give, they stop valuing it. And once they stop valuing it, they stop protecting it. This is the emotional economy collapsing in real time. You keep inflating your contributions, more effort, more empathy, more forgiveness, hoping it will stabilize things. But inflation only works when the market wants your currency. When the market doesn't care, the value plummets no matter how much you print. You can give someone everything you think is priceless, and they'll treat it like loose change, because that's what it feels like in their world. Not because they're cruel, because they're misaligned. And you refuse to see the misalignment because seeing it would force you into a painful truth. You've been investing based on potential rather than performance. You've been treating hope as evidence. You've been anchoring your trust to an imagined version of them that doesn't exist outside your mind. This is where sunk cost fallacy takes hold. You've already given so much time, so much patience, so much emotional energy, that walking away feels like waste. So instead of acknowledging the mismatch, you double down. You think, maybe if I explain better, maybe if I show more, maybe if I lower the bar just one more time. But every time you lower the bar, you shrink yourself to fit someone else's limitations. And shrinking yourself is not compassion. It's self-erasure. It's the beginning of self-worth erosion. You start believing the story that you don't deserve better because better hasn't happened yet. You internalize their inability as your inadequacy. You confuse their limits with your value. This is how learned helplessness begins. You stop expecting reciprocity. You stop expecting consistency. You stop expecting reliability. You start expecting failure from others and exhaustion from yourself. You become the emotional janitor, cleaning up the messes, patching the cracks, smoothing the conflicts, because someone has to hold the structure together, and you know it won't be them. And eventually, you start calling all of this loyalty, as if loyalty means sacrificing your needs for the comfort of others, as if loyalty means holding everything together while they drift through the relationship like a passive participant, as if loyalty means rewarding inconsistency with more chances. But loyalty without boundaries isn't loyalty, it's emotional martyrdom. And emotional martyrdom always ends the same way. You break under the weight of the responsibilities you assigned and the expectations they never agreed to. This isn't betrayal. This is misplacement on both sides. You placed them too high, and you placed yourself too low. You keep staying because you think leaving means you were wrong about them. And being wrong feels like failure. It feels like a personal flaw, like a stain on your judgment. So, instead of adjusting the placement, you cling to the role you assigned them. You hold on to the invisible contract you drafted in your mind. You fight for the version of them that only exists in your imagination. But this is where loss aversion quietly controls you. Humans hate losing more than they enjoy gaining. You'd rather hold on to something harmful than confront the discomfort of letting go. You convince yourself that the investment is too big to walk away from. The time, the conversations, the shared experiences, the emotional exposure. It feels like trashing an entire gym membership because the treadmill broke one time. But maybe you should have asked whether the gym was ever equipped to support your goals in the first place. This is the sunk cost fallacy in its purest form. You stay not because the relationship is good, but because you've already paid too much. You keep believing that one more act of patience, one more act of forgiveness, one more round of teaching them how to treat you will finally bridge the emotional gap. But emotional gaps don't close through repetition. They close through compatibility. And compatibility isn't something you build alone. The longer you stay, the more you compromise your internal boundaries. And boundary erosion doesn't happen with dramatic collapses. It happens through tiny, almost unnoticeable concessions. You say, "It's okay," when it isn't. You say, "I understand," when you don't. You say, "It's not a big deal," when it absolutely is. Every time you swallow your disappointment, you shrink a little. Every time you excuse their inconsistency, your standard drops a little. And every time you try to be easy to love, you end up making yourself easier to take advantage of. This erosion is slow, but it's real, and it adds up. Then comes the emotional labor spiral. You start taking responsibility for their behavior, explaining it, rationalizing it, cushioning it. You become the translator of their emotional limitations, telling yourself stories that protect them from accountability. They're stressed. They're not used to trust. They just need time. Maybe. But maybe they're simply not capable. Not because they're bad people, but because your expectations are set in a league they're not playing in. Here's the hardest truth. Not everyone is emotionally employable in the role you want them to fill. Some people are great companions, but terrible confidants. Some people are fun, but unreliable. Some people are kind, but inconsistent. Some people are stable, but emotionally unavailable. And some people just don't have the psychological skill set required to carry the trust you want to give. Yet you stay. You stay because leaving would require self-honesty. It would require admitting that you trusted the potential instead of the evidence. It would require acknowledging that the story you wrote for them doesn't match their actual character profile. And acknowledgement feels like humiliation. So instead, you numb yourself with maintenance. You become the emotional caretaker, the fixer, the stabilizer, the one who keeps things going. But that isn't love. That's survival mode. And survival mode is just learned helplessness wearing a polite mask. What you call hope has quietly become inertia. What you call patience has become self-denial. What you call forgiveness has become a way to avoid uncomfortable decisions. And what you call loyalty has become fear. Fear of starting over. Fear of being alone with your own thoughts. Fear that maybe you won't find someone who matches your effort. But staying for fear is not safety. It's stagnation. And stagnation is the quietest form of self-betrayal. You think they betrayed you. But deep down, the betrayal that hurts the most is the one you committed against yourself. The moment you decided to lower your standards to protect the relationship instead of protecting your well-being. The cost of staying isn't the relationship breaking. It's you breaking. Slowly, privately, silently. You reach a point where the disappointment becomes predictable, where the pattern repeats with such precision that you can almost set your watch by it. And yet, you still hesitate to adjust the distance. you still hesitate to reorganize the emotional structure. Because doing so feels harsh, almost like punishment. You don't want to play the role of judge. You don't want to feel superior. You don't want to admit that someone you cared about simply cannot hold the position you placed them in. But here's the shift you've been avoiding. Moving someone to the correct distance is not cruelty. It's realism. It's the psychological version of putting furniture in the right place so the room functions properly. When the wrong piece sits in the wrong corner, the whole space feels off. It's not the furniture's fault. It's the placement. People work the same way. You've been trying to use someone as a foundation when they were only meant to be a decoration. You've been trying to use someone as a support beam when they were only capable of being a casual connection. You've been trying to use someone as a long-term investment when they were only meant to be a short-term encounter. And the mismatch created tension, resentment, and confusion. Not because either of you is bad, but because the job description was unrealistic from the start. This is where the truth becomes liberating. Not everyone belongs in the front row of your life. Not everyone has the emotional reliability to hold a key position. And that doesn't make them villains. It simply means you need to place them in the correct emotional category. A coworker level of responsibility for a coworker level of capacity. A casual friend level of trust for a casual friend level of consistency. A limited access role for someone who has repeatedly shown limited follow-through. It's not punishment, it's alignment. But to do this, you must confront the psychological mechanisms that kept you stuck. The sunk cost fallacy that convinced you to keep investing. The reciprocity breakdown that normalized your one-sided effort. The boundary collapse that blurred the lines between what you needed and what you tolerated. The self-worth erosion that made you believe you didn't deserve better placement. And beneath all of these lies, the deepest mechanism of all, self-deception loops. You convince yourself that if you adjust the distance, you're giving up. But the truth is the opposite. Adjusting the distance is the purest form of acceptance. It's you acknowledging the truth without resentment, without dramatics, without moral superiority. It's you saying, "This is who you are. This is what you can handle. And I will treat you accordingly." When you stop treating people like potential and start treating them like reality, everything becomes easier. Expectations become clearer. Disappointments become fewer. Emotional labor decreases. The invisible contracts dissolve. And trust becomes something you place with intention rather than desperation. Most importantly, you reclaim your role. You stop being the emotional custodian for people who never asked for the job. You stop bending your standards to fit someone else's limitations. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure. You stop calling your exhaustion kindness. You finally recognize that your job is not to upgrade people into versions of themselves they never agreed to become. Your job is to place them where they function best in your life. No closer, no farther, no higher, no lower. Just correct. And in that correction, you find peace. Not because others change, but because your expectations finally match reality. You realize that betrayal was never the point. It was misplacement. And misplacement is fixable, not by changing them, but by repositioning them to the emotional distance that reflects their true capacity. And repositioning yourself back into the center of your own life, where you belong. You've spent so much of your life believing that the pain you feel comes from people turning against you, when in reality, most of it came from placing the wrong expectations on the wrong shoulders. There's a quiet relief in realizing this, not a triumphant one, but a steady, grounding calm. Something soft, something that doesn't demand justice or apologies, just understanding. Because once you see the structure clearly, you stop personalizing what was never meant to be personal. You stop expecting emotional fluency from people who have only ever spoken in fragments. You stop assigning loyalty roles to people who don't have the capacity to hold them. And in that shift, something inside you loosens. An overdue exhale, a release from carrying relationships that needed restructuring, not saving. This clarity doesn't make you colder. It makes you cleaner. You stop moving through the world weighed down by invisible contracts no one agreed to. You stop shrinking yourself to cushion the shortcomings of others. You stop calling chaos attachment and exhaustion love. You start acting with quiet precision, placing people where they belong, without guilt, without resentment, without drama. And little by little, you return to yourself, to the space where your boundaries are not walls, but doors, open to those who can enter respectfully, closed to those who cannot carry the responsibility of being close. You are not being betrayed. You are reorganizing your life. You are choosing alignment over assumption, reality over fantasy, clarity over chaos, and respect, first for yourself, then for everyone else.